KPCA LP Petaluma, California, 103.3 FM. This is the Healing Within Show. I am your host, AnneMarie Lafferty, and happy Friday, everybody. We made it through another week. And my in-studio guest today, I am very honored to have. And my in-studio guest is a Petaluma resident, and it is Forrest Gander, and he is the 2019 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry winner. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, AnneMarie.
And let's see, you've studied geology and English at the College of William and Mary, and you attended San Francisco State, and you have published 10 books of poetry and 2 novels.
Yeah, and a lot of translations.
And that's kind of a little thing I'm going to touch on. Do you translate your own work, or are you translating other works?
No, I don't translate my own work. I translate a lot of Latin American writers, a lot of Mexican writers, and writers from Spain, and a couple writers from Japan.
Oh, wow. Okay, we're going to talk about some languages a little bit later on. So how many languages do you know and how those came into your life? And so I think starting out, your family traveled a lot.
My family was my mom and my 2 sisters and myself. And because my mom was a school teacher, she had summers off, and she did take us on trips.
And were there some that were your favorite, or how would you decide as a family where you would go, or?
No, mom was boss. So she took us. One of the most memorable ones was a long trip out to South Dakota, to Rapid City and Hill City, South Dakota, and pretty much saw the whole country. We were traveling from the East Coast. We were living in Virginia then, and that was a thrill. And an anti-thrill, the sort of childlike wonder at all those signs, for 2-headed donkeys and, right up ahead, 500 feet. We would make my mom stop at those little freak shows and then come out and be so disappointed in what we saw.
And when you were growing up, did you want to be a writer, or did you have other aspirations?
Well, I really loved biology and nature, and we lived close to a forest. I spent a lot of my time in the woods, and I had all kinds of pets. My mother was fantastically tolerant. I could come home with 6-foot black snakes, and my mom wouldn't wink. And then I majored in geology. I loved rocks, and being a geologist helped teach me how to read closer, because you're looking both at large scale structures and microscopic structures, and going back and forth between the two. And that's been something that I've carried with me into writing poetry. Mm-hmm. But my mom, as a school teacher, read me poetry when I was really young, and it caught. So I wanted to be a poet.
Yeah. I'm a journaler myself and teach a lot of people just, getting your thoughts out, just let them, flow through you and out. And a lot of times it could be therapeutic, but a lot of, something maybe that we're searching for is there on the paper looking back at us.
That's exactly it. Instead of sort of knowing what you're going to write ahead of time, it's often what you see in the process of writing that surprises us and turns out to be of value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And did you have other influences growing up? Were they also literary or music, or?
I was a bad clarinet player. I'm still a bad clarinet player. Before I die, I've long said I want to speak another language fluently, and I want to play an instrument well. And I've pretty much got the other language, which would be Spanish, though I've studied Japanese too. But we're going to have to work on that music. How about you? Do you play an instrument?
Ooh. I grew up with 2 pianos in the house.
Oh.
There was a baby grand in the living room on the other side of my wall, and I would fall asleep every night to my mother playing the piano.
That's lovely.
But, sitting at the piano, I didn't feel that same passion. But I would say music has a huge role in my life.
Mm-hmm. Did your mom play classical or contemporary pop?
She played, I would say, a mix between classical and contemporary.
Mm-hmm.
She was from, Irish-Scottish descent. So there were some of, old country songs that she would play that, but it was very nice having music in the home.
Mm-hmm.
She taught lessons, and so growing up with music is a big piece of me, and still to this day, I just find so much joy in listening to music.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's anything that is expressive, whether it's writing, music, just, connecting in some other way with ourself, I think is amazing.
Music is so deep into what humanity is. It's like sharing a meal, sharing something musical, a song that goes just back to the beginning of what humans are. And poetry is there too.
Mm-hmm.
I think there hasn't been any culture that hasn't had some form of poetry, which I also think of as coming out of the body as a kind of music.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there was one where I saw that, combining, nature and animals and, creating depth and texture within the written word. You can look at a picture and see, the depth and different things, but, so much of your writing is also, within landscapes and has multi-dimensions to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the way that people are changed by the landscapes that they live in, the sort of our rhythms of perception, how we talk maybe even.
Mm-hmm.
There's a cool woman from the 1930s, Mary Austin, who has a book on Native Americans and American rhythm. She says at one point that you can hear in the Gettysburg Address of Lincoln's that he must have been a man who spent a long time chopping wood. And so a relationship between speech patterns even and the places we live and what we do in them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Was there a life event that motivated you or inspired you into writing or expressing your talent through writing?
Well, from the time I was little, my grandfather, who was Swedish, would stomp around the house reciting 19th century poems, and my mom had picked up a love of poetry and so read to me from when I was little, Carl Sandburg and Edgar Allan Poe. So I was writing, I was interested in it, and I wasn't reading contemporary poetry until I got to college, and then I did, and then I was torn between geology and writing. I was the only male basically in my family, and felt like I needed to get a responsible job, which poetry probably wouldn't provide. And so I majored in geology, but the summer after I graduated, I found that I had third stage melanoma, and it was a really close call, and I was in the hospital for a while and had the opportunity to think, what if my life wasn't going to be as long as I was expecting it to be? What do I really want to do? And I really wanted to write. And so I took that risk and came out to California, San Francisco State University, and got an MA in creative writing. So that was a marker for me. Mm-hmm. Was sort of little visit by death.
Luckily, it
he
left.
Yeah, he didn't stay that long. I was lucky. Yeah, and you too. No?
Yeah, we were sharing a little bit before the show that I've had 2 surgeries for melanoma as well, and it makes you thankful. makes you stop for a little bit and, recognize the blessings and things that you do have, and can motivate you in many ways to, fulfill a higher purpose that maybe, you weren't aware of or knew. So,
with you there.
Yeah. And does inspiration for a project, does it come to you easily? How does a poem start to come in to you? Is it an image or an experience or maybe a vision?
Well, it can be almost anything. I keep a lot of notes, I read a lot, and I listen to people a lot. And so sometimes there'll be a musical phrase or a line that particularly interests me that might start something. But I'm also interested in larger things, like the times we live in, and for instance, that we live in a time of intense environmental crisis, and that relates to my long-term interest in the environment and geology and the landscape. So that's been an overriding concern for most of my life as a writer, is the environment as a subject matter. But also, I agree with this thing Ezra Pound says, that only emotion endures, and I want my poems to touch on emotions that people feel, because that's perhaps the most important thing that we are. And it seems miraculous to me that, we can have a few fragments of, like a poet like Sappho. She wrote in a language that disappeared from the earth 2,600 years ago, Attic Greek. And we can read a fragment of her poetry and feel intense emotion. That something has lasted that long touches me deeply.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, and like you said, over time, you can still connect with something that may have been written, so long ago. And a lot of times, so many, gifted people aren't concentrating on the legacy or maybe what the effect that will have. So that's nice that, again, the written word or music, stays with us forever. And it continues to affect, future generations.
Yeah, William Carlos Williams says poetry is the news that stays news.
And is there a certain exercise or anything that you go through to just get things flowing, or it just comes in when it's ready?
No, you got to go after it. If you wait for inspiration, it's like that thing that you said earlier, that in your journaling, it's sometimes the things that come out that you weren't prepared for that surprise you. I think for most writers too, you have to sit down and work at it. Just make notes, try to write bad sentence, bad line after bad line, until something happens that sparks. And it doesn't happen every day.
Yeah, exactly. Just being okay with what it is then. And, I tell people, it doesn't have to be pretty, but just getting the thoughts out.
You have to allow yourself to fail. If you think that you have to write a perfect sentence each time, you don't go anywhere.
Yeah. We always try and get it right, the first time, or we put so much pressure on ourselves.
We do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is the Healing Within show, and my in-studio guest today is Forrest Gander, and he is the 2019 Pulitzer Prize winner in poetry. And I usually have my guests pick a song or two, and the first song is Whose Will Be Done.
Oh.
And does this have special meaning to you, or?
This Peter's song is, I heard him sing for the first time here in Petaluma,
Oh.
at Mike and Julia's house house music party, which is over in the West Side. About once a month, they have a musician visit and play for a house full of people. And I was touched by his music, and it was also connected to his interest in poetry and a poet that was very important to me named Frank Stanford.
Okay. Yeah, and music is somewhat like poetry. You know, there's groupings. It can be repetitive, but also has meaning. So, very nice. Okay, so this is Whose Will Be Done by Justin Peter Kinkle Schuster. I printed out the sounding if you'd like to close the show with reading that.
What?
I printed out the sounding if you would
Great.
like to close the show out
Okay.
while reading that. Okay.
That's nice. He's got an album called Constant Stranger.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's very just soothing, and he has a great voice.
He does. He's got a good presence too.
Yeah.
And like his lyrics.
And does he perform here often? Is he also from Petaluma, or?
He's not from Petaluma, but he's passing through here again, I think, next month.
Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic. Oh, good. Okay. Maybe I can catch him while he's in town. Are there any other projects that you have maybe started, but then are kind of in transition, or do you finish a project once you start it?
I'm pretty monofocused, so I can either work on a translation or work on a novel or work on poems. I'm working on poems right now that have to do with California, and I've been spending some time with with the Sonoma County Poet Laureate, whose name is Maya Khosla. She's a wonderful poet and also a biologist, and we've been down in Yosemite where she's been researching post-fire forests.
Oh, yeah.
And we've been looking for black-backed woodpeckers and evidence of how quickly life comes back to a burned-out forest.
Yeah, that's it's amazing driving between O'Hare and Napa, Sonoma, and watching the evolution. You know, right after the fires, to seeing the first green sprouts coming back on the hills, and you know, new growth, new life.
Yeah, and here too, I've been over in Napa on the Atlas Mountain, where another poet, my connections to the world, Jane Mead, had a vineyard, and she lost it and lost her house and lost everything in it, including her dogs. But she and the people who worked on the vineyard made it out. They survived. But taking walks with her through her property and seeing things come back also, one sees how life comes from death.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's hard to find the silver lining sometimes.
Yeah, there's so much grief that, and I'm also trying to write about Santa Rosa and the Tubbs fire. The gym that I go to here in Petaluma, which is a CrossFit gym, 38 degrees, is full of firefighters, and they educate me.
Yeah, I knew one who, during those wildfires, during their, you know, short break time or whatever, you know, would text, just, you know, just getting support, or just, you know, what do the firefighters need right now, and just, you know, sending strength or sending energy, and just, you know, sending those, you know, good emotions, or, you know, sending those positive energies into an area that, you know, it just, there was so much overwhelm.
Yes.
You know, we're out here and it doesn't feel like we're making a difference, and it's just, you know, this is just so much bigger than us. But
curiously, in Japan, when the Fukushima nuclear reactor broke down, there was a poet living in Fukushima. He was actually, his parents were living there, and he was with his parents when that happened, and there was a mandatory evacuation, but the parents were too old to move. So he stayed there with all this radiation around, and began to Twitter reports from the scene that became the poems for a book that proved massively popular in Japan. Those reports from the front.
And he and his parents survived?
They did survive.
Wow, that's amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
And that's so brave of him to stay.
It was so risky. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you just make a decision in a moment, and yeah.
Who knows how much radiation his body absorbed, or his parents.
Yeah. Wow. So we've mentioned that you have written 10 books of poetry and 2 novels. Is there a format that you prefer? I mean, do you prefer poetry versus
I like it. I like it all. I'm very conscious, as you are, as everyone is, that poetry scares people, and that it doesn't really participate in the economy of either the culture or the financial economy. But at the same time, it's really fascinating to me. So it turns out that people are reading fewer books than they have been in the past, but they're reading more poetry books, and it's lots of young people that continue to find poetry expresses something that they're looking for in this age of spectacle and this age of, you know, fast visual extravaganza. There's something soulful about the expression of poetry that takes people deeper, and that it's the young that continue to find it. And I think that'll continue to happen. It's not going to disappear. That that it is kind of amazing that you can sit alone in silence and interact with something that opens your insides up in a profound way.
And I'm glad to hear that the young and up and coming are embracing that, just because with so much that, you know, they're challenged with.
Yeah.
You know, with you know, there's, you know, all the social media pressure that, or, you know, bullying, whatever that is, that, you know, poetry can be, you know, that light for them.
It can be grounding.
Absolutely.
When everything else is moving so fast.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned being a translator and, you know, translating your work. So how did the language of Japanese, is that something that you have a connection with, or travels to Japan, or?
Well, I go to Japan a lot. I mean, at this point in my life, I'm so interested in international poetry. I want to know what's going on. What are people thinking about, and how are they expressing their feelings in other places? And I've had a particular interest in Japan since my early 20s. And it's a really exciting time for literature in Japan. It's kind of an explosive time. So I've been involved in a couple translation projects there, but always with, I studied Japanese, but my Japanese is very limited. And so my translations have all been with a co-translator who's been terrific, Kyoko Yoshida. And in translation, both Spanish and Japanese, I'm very attentive, what you were talking about earlier, music, to the way that meaning is made in literature, not just through semantics, not just through what you say, but through how you say it. So that famous old Japanese poem, Kure yako no yuku mo kaeru mo wakarete wa hiru mo hiranu mo osaka no seki. What you hear, even though you don't know the meaning of the poem, are all those long O sounds.
Yes, that's where my ear
went. And linguists tell us that long O's and long U's are connected to deeper emotions. This is, in fact, a poem about people parting at a wall and saying goodbye to each other. So it's a poem of longing. And the sounds themselves sort of carry that across. So when you translate, you're very attentive to not just semantic meaning, but trying to carry the beauty of the sound from one language into another.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank now on a song, but half was in English and half was in Italian. And the Italian, like, just made me just stop and go, you know, took my breath away. And then, you know, and it's part of the English. I mean, it was still beautiful, but just the beauty of the Italian language.
Yeah.
I was awestruck.
Cool.
Yeah, I wish I could remember who that was now.
In some of my own poems, I also use Spanish. I mean, our language, English, has become, it's a very flexible language that is able to take in other languages. And so, and Spanish is so present in our culture, in California culture now, that it seems part of the fabric of North American life to use more than one language.
Yeah, and So this is the Healing Within show, and I am your host, AnneMarie Lafferty, and sitting here with my in-studio guest today is Petaluma's Forrest Gander, and he is the 2019 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry recipient. And when I say Pulitzer Prize winner, is that still surreal? Has it
Yeah, it's pretty...
sunk,
No,
sunk in?
no, there was just, the ceremony was just last week, and I was strangely really nervous about it. It was in New York at Columbia University, and no, it was such a shock and so unexpected that I'm still processing it, and probably will be for a while.
So with these works of Be Still, did you have the intent?
Be With.
Be with. I'm sorry. Be With. Did you even have the intention at all of Pulitzer Prize winning, award winning? It comes from such a deep place in your soul, but did that have any space?
No, this book, a lot of which is about grieving my wife's death, and there's another section about my mother's Alzheimer's, which people have responded to a lot because so many of us are dealing with that. It came out of I couldn't not write these poems when they started to roll out of me, and the last thing I was thinking about was any kind of award.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes when we're not setting out to do something, when there isn't that, being attached to an end result of something, that's where the sweetness is.
It is, though it's complicated in this case, and you who are thinking about wounds and healing on this show so often can understand how strange it would be to get an award for a book that's about grieving, where the person that you most want to share the award with isn't there to share it with you. That complicates it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, writing about grieving, you wonder about the ethics of it the whole time. Whether are you just writing about yourself, about your own misery, or is there something that you're doing in which the missing person is being rebuilt and made present again? And it's hard to walk that line.
Mm-hmm. Did you have some healing or experience some peace then through this process?
I haven't
Hard to say.
felt any peace yet. I think, it's like I have the feeling constantly of cold air on the place, like where an amputated leg had been. That there's part of me that I'm not even ready to have heal yet, because in that pain I also feel the presence of the missing person. But my life has has gone on like it does, and I'm involved with someone else now, and that's been a joyous experience.
Oh, good. Yeah, everything kind of is on its own time frame. We can't rush things.
No,
and
better not to. Yeah.
Yeah, being okay just where they're at is a good place to be.
So that's your wisdom that you, I know a lot about.
Yeah, is just being okay where you're at right now, and what needs to heal, or what is the next layer will come when it's ready.
Yeah.
And yeah.
They call when a wound is closing, like from your outrage as you're healing, and it's closing in on all sides, the skin is beginning to graft, and doctors call that creep. it's slow, and you have to, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's not a marathon.
No.
We're not all running marathons. And how did you come to settle in Petaluma? I mean, you've traveled the world, and here our little.
I'm so happy to be in Petaluma, and I just feel so grateful that I've been welcomed here by the community. I was born in California, and then I went to grad school in San Francisco, and I fell in love with this landscape and always wanted to come back. And I love Petaluma for the kind of community that it is. It's really mixed, and I love being close enough to a great city, but far enough away that I can be in the on Mount Tam and completely alone, or on near a seagull rookery on the headlands. It's just a great location, and I find the landscape completely inspiring. And I'm hoping Petaluma doesn't become overcrowded in the next 10 years.
And do you write here in Petaluma, or is Petaluma a place for you to just kind of decompress and just...
No, I love writing in Petaluma. I'm like a lizard. I like to go to my same desk, my same chair, same time. I like my books around me. The best writing circumstance for me is here. I find it much harder to write on the road.
I was going to ask, do you write on the road?
I take notes on the road.
Okay.
But I usually end up with those notes back in Petaluma.
Yeah, and then you put it all together. So you have been listening to Forrest Gander here on the Healing Within show, and he is the 2019 recipient of the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry, and we're going to go to our next song, and this is called Betty Lonely. And is there...
This is by a great singer-songwriter named Vic Chestnut, who was paralyzed in a truck accident, so he couldn't use any of his body below his waist, and even his hands were very limited, and still he became one of America's major singer-songwriters. Michael Stipe of REM helped in the beginning of his career, hearing him play at the 40 Watt Club in Athens, Georgia, and but Vic played all over the world and had a huge audience before his suicide a few years ago, just around Christmas.
Okay, so this is Betty Lonely, and this is by Vic Chestnut.
It's
Beautiful
great to
song.
hear him again. that Georgia twang of his. I got to write the album notes for an album of his called "Is the Actor Happy?"
And how did that come about?
Because I wrote him a fan letter early in his career, and he started to come and on his tours and stay at our house, and so we became close friends. He and his wife Tina Chestnut.
And where do they live now? Are they?
Well, he died, and she continues to live in Athens, Georgia.
Okay. Oh wow. So let's see. I'm just kind of reading a little bit about you. You said you wanted to have a big party.
I do.
So you're still to have your big party?
I'm still to have. I just got the check from the Pulitzer committee, so. But yeah, I'd love to have a celebratory party.
That's exciting. Yeah, just.
We'll get you an invitation.
Oh. No, thank you. Yeah, it all just becoming real.
And wanting to celebrate with my community, which I feel so engaged with here.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you mind reading one of your poems from Be With? Would you mind reading The Sounding?
Sure.
Okay.
So this starts with a line that's stolen from one of the oldest books in Chinese literature called the Tianwen, which is a book of philosophy, but it's all questions. And it's thinking about environmental crisis.
Okay.
The Sounding. What closes and then luminous? What opens and then dark? Into what do you stumble but this violet extinction with froth on your lips? 8:16 a.m. The morning's sleepy face rolls its million eyes. Migrating flocks of your like-same species incandesce into transparency. A birdwatcher lifts her binoculars. The continuous, with or without your words, situates you here, here, here. Even while you knuckle your eyes in disbelief, those voices you love, human and not, can you hear their echoes, hissing away like fiery scale on some fiery scale from an ingot hammered on some blacksmith's anvil? And behind those voices, what is that, blowing the valves of your ears open, as black rain, not in torrents, but ceaselessly comes, unchecked out of everywhere, with nothing to slacken it?
Thank you. I thought it only appropriate for you to read to some of your work. So
thank you for asking.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the Healing Within show, and my in-studio guest has been Forrest Gander. And are there any upcoming projects for you, or what is next?
Well, there's going to be another thing that I'm that I'm going to participate in for the first time that I just heard about is there's a Petaluma poetry walk that evidently happens every year, and so that'll be a really fun thing for me to take part in and to meet a lot of the other local poets in Petaluma. I think there are readings all over the city, and
Oh,
I'll have one at Copperfield Books.
Great. And have you spoken at Copperfield's?
No, I
before,
haven't
over the
given
years?
any readings in Petaluma. No. Out at there's a wonderful bookstore out in Point Reyes where I've read Point Reyes books. Beautifully curated bookstore.
I'll have to check that out. And have you been busy doing a lot of interviews?
I have been.
Uh-huh.
There have been a lot of interviews. And those are funny because sometimes I'm being interviewed by people who don't read much literature and certainly don't read much poetry. And it's good to engage those people also.
Mm-hmm.
I want to convince them that there's something worthwhile about looking at a poem.
Yeah, absolutely. And any parting words or anything that you want to share with Petaluma or?
No, AnneMarie, I'm really grateful that you invited me in, and I'm full of gratefulness for being able to live in Petaluma in this community.
Yeah, and I think you made a good choice following your heart and your passion for writing.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it has, I think, served you well and leaves a legacy. And
that's what I try to tell, like high school students or college students, that in thinking about the future, the only thing to do is to choose what you're most passionate about. You don't want to be 55 in a job that you chose as a 20-year-old that doesn't satisfy you, that doesn't let you exercise your faculties at large.
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, to follow your heart and follow what makes you happy.
Yep, with you there too.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this has been the Healing Within show, and we have one more song here to close, and it looks like A Lighter Dream. And does this have significance for you?
This does. I was just in Shanghai at a literary festival, and I got to collaborate with this young electronic musician kind of underground electronic musician who has a huge audience in China, and it was one of the most fun collaborations that I've ever done, and she goes by the name 33.
Okay, I was going to read this out.
So 33 EMYBW is what she calls herself.
Okay. So fantastic. So I want to say thank you to our listeners this week, and thank you to Mr. Gander for coming in, and much success to you.
Thanks a lot. AnneMarie, please call me Forrest.
Forrest.
Yeah,
okay. I just feel like I need to be so formal.
No, not with this dog.
Okay. Everyone, thank you for listening. Have a very blessed week.